Welcome to a deep dive into the world of 16th century Genevan illustrated books. We're about to uncover a story that's way more dramatic than, just ink on paper. Think religious upheaval, strict censorship, and maybe a touch of rebellion. You'll be exploring this unique period with research by Dr. Christophe Chazelon, who's practically written the book on the subject.
Chazelon's research really does paint a vivid picture of the times. It all starts with a printing boom in Geneva from 1478 to 1535.
So Geneva's just cranking out books left and right.
Absolutely. It was very similar to what was happening in other European cities at the time,
Oh,
though there's a distinct German influence in the style of the books, heavy on those Gothic typefaces and the intricate borders.
yeah.
Very different from what was being produced in Italy with their airy Renaissance illustrations.
So no Botticelli angels floating around on Genevan pages. Got it. What kind of books were they printing?
Well, the first illustrated book to come off the presses in Geneva was Histoire de la Belle Mélusine back in 1478. It had 63 full-page colored woodcuts. It's a serious commitment to illustration.
63. That's impressive. Were these mostly religious texts?
Actually, a lot of them were what we'd call chivalric romances. Think tales of knights' quests, damsels in distress, all that good stuff. Olivier de Castille Artustalgarbe is a great example. It was printed 6 times between 1482 and 1497, and each reprint tells a fascinating story.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the story with the reprints?
Well, the first edition was text only, no illustrations, but by the later editions, they had added a whopping 41 woodcuts. You can see the market for illustrated books was already booming, and publishers were catching on, adding those woodcuts to later editions. Pure marketing
A
genius.
smart move. So Geneva's printing scene is thriving. What happens next?
Well, this is where things take a dramatic turn. Imagine the year is 1536. John Calvin arrives in Geneva, and the Reformation takes hold.
I read a bit about Calvin. Didn't he have some strong opinions about, well, pretty much everything?
That's putting it mildly. And his views on imagery were particularly strict. Remember, this is the age of the image elsewhere in Europe. But in Geneva, Calvin saw images as potential idols, distractions from the purity of the word.
So no more knightly adventures, no more fantastical creatures in those woodcuts.
Geneva essentially becomes a theocracy with very strict rules. Novels, banned, dancing forbidden. And certain types of images, absolutely not. This shift is absolutely key to understanding why Geneva's printing took such a different path.
So what happens to all those talented illustrators? Did they just pack up their chisels and head for the hills?
The impact on illustrated books was immediate and drastic. Production plummeted to a mere 1 to 2% of the total output, and most of the remaining illustrated books were, you guessed it, Bibles.
So even the good book wasn't safe from Calvin's scrutiny.
Even the Bible illustrations were carefully chosen. They were more like diagrams and maps focusing on objects and places, not people. Think visual footnotes rather than artistic interpretations.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. Function over form, information over artistry. It's a stark contrast to what I've seen in Catholic Bibles from the same period. All those dramatic scenes and, well, let's just say some of those illustrations were a little less than saintly.
Exactly. You're talking hundreds of illustrations in those Catholic Bibles, some even bordering on, shall we say, scandalous, a world apart from Geneva.
A good reminder that context is everything. Can you give me an example of how this played out in a specific Bible edition?
One example that really highlights this contrast is the Bible of Francois Vatable, printed in 1553. Even when depicting the high priest, the illustrations focus solely on his clothing, not his personality or expression.
Wow. So no dramatic poses or knowing glances for Genevan high priests. It sounds like the Calvinist mindset really did a number on the visual landscape. So we've got Geneva in full-on austerity mode. Were there any glimmers of change on the horizon for these illustrated books?
Even in this climate of strict censorship, there were signs of shifting tides. After Calvin's death in 1564, things began to loosen up. Just a little.
It's like everyone collectively exhaled.
That's a great way to put it. One figure who really pushed the boundaries was Théodore de Bèze, Calvin's successor. He published a book that included 90 portraits.
Wait, 90 portraits? That feels like a bold move for the time. Wasn't that a huge risk for Bez? How did he justify that in such a restrictive environment?
He certainly faced criticism for it. He tried to be careful by only including portraits of deceased Protestant reformers.
So no living subjects.
Okay.
Clever strategy. But still 90 portraits? It seems like a sign that things were changing, even if it was slowly.
Exactly. Geneva's printers were starting to see a world beyond purely religious texts.
Did illustrated books make a comeback?
They did, but it was a gradual process. Between 1565 and 1600, the percentage of illustrated books rose to between 3.5 and 5%. Still a far cry from those pre-Reformation levels, but definitely a noticeable shift.
What kind of subjects were they exploring in these new illustrated books?
All sorts: geography, medicine, and military strategy. After years of being confined to a world of text, Genevan readers were suddenly exposed to visual representations of faraway lands, the human body complex battle formations.
That must have been a pretty mind-blowing experience for them. Any specific examples that come to mind?
There's Histoire de la mappement papistique, a map designed to be assembled from 16 separate woodcuts.
A 16-piece woodcut map. That's incredible. You must have needed serious patience to assemble that.
It really speaks to the growing interest in cartography and exploration. Another fascinating example is Jean de Lery's Histoire d'un voyage en la terre du Brésil, published in 1578. It included illustrations of the indigenous people, their customs, and the Brazilian landscape.
Brazil? No, that's exotic. I can see why that would have captivated Genevan readers.
Of course, we have to remember the context of intense religious rivalry. Some argue that these seemingly educational books also served a propagandistic purpose, subtly promoting the Protestant viewpoint.
Hold on, are we really saying that all those intricate maps and illustrations were just Protestant propaganda? That feels a bit reductive, doesn't it? I mean, surely there was genuine scientific curiosity at play as well.
That's a fair point. It's likely a blend of both. The Medicare artist Principes is another good example. This was a collection of medical texts. While the Genevan editions borrowed illustrations from Parisian counterparts, they made sure to obscure the patient's nudity.
So even as they were exploring new subjects, that Calvinist mindset was still shaping how those images were used. Fascinating. It's like they were tiptoeing back into the world of figurative imagery, but with a sense of caution and restraint. Were there any instances where they just let loose and embraced the artistry?
Absolutely. Despite the restrictions, there were moments of true artistic brilliance. One of the most stunning examples is Jacques Bessantine's Astronomia, published in 1599. It's been described as both scientifically and aesthetically remarkable, a testament to the level of artistry that could be found in Geneva despite the limitations.
Astronomy. That sounds beautiful. So it seems like Geneva's printing industry was walking a tightrope between intellectual curiosity and religious conservatism. They were pushing the boundaries, but always with one eye on the prevailing religious climate. Did this unique environment contribute to a distinct Genevan visual style? It really does make you wonder if those restrictions inadvertently fostered like a unique visual language in Geneva.
It's a question that continues to fascinate scholars. Some argue that the Calvinist clampdown hindered artistic development, while others believe that the limitations forced Genevan printers to find creative new ways to use illustration, perhaps leading to a distinct visual style.
So maybe those constraints actually sparked innovation.
It's certainly possible. Think about it this way. Geneva was a hub for intellectual exchange and religious debate. Ideas were flowing in and out of the city, and those ideas were bound to find expression in the visual arts, even if it was in subtle ways.
So what does this all mean for our listener who's now knee-deep in 16th century Geneva?
It demonstrates that visual storytelling has a way of persisting even in a society as tightly controlled as 16th century Geneva. The history of the book is never just about the words on a page. It's about the interplay of image and text and the cultural forces that shape them.
It's like those illustrated books were little rebels, pushing back against the status quo in their own quiet way.
I like that analogy. And remember, these books weren't just static objects. They were dynamic tools for education, persuasion, and even subversion. Imagine the impact those illustrations had on readers who had been living in a world dominated by text. It must have been like a window opening onto a whole new dimension of knowledge and experience.
Okay, so I have to ask, we've talked about the German and Italian influences, but did Geneva ultimately develop its own unique visual style?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that's still up for debate. There's no easy answer. Some argue that the long period of restrictions stunted Geneva's artistic growth, while others believe it forced them to find new and innovative ways to use illustration, perhaps even leading to a unique visual language. It's definitely something to ponder as you continue to explore this fascinating period.
And think about the long-term impact. Did this period of constraint ultimately lay the groundwork for a later flourishing of visual arts in Geneva? Or did it create a lasting aversion to imagery that shaped the city's cultural identity?
Those are excellent questions, and ultimately that's what makes history so captivating. It's not just about dates and facts. It's about grappling with these complex questions and exploring the enduring legacy of the past.
Well, there you have it. Your deep dive into the world of illustrated books in 16th century Geneva. We've journeyed from lavish woodcuts to austere diagrams, witnessed the ebb and flow of artistic freedom, and explored the fascinating interplay of religion and visual culture.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's a whole universe of knowledge waiting to be discovered out there. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those intellectual fires burning.
So to our listener, we hope this deep dive has left you with a few new curiosities to ponder. Happy exploring.